had some deprogramming, she could be such a fantastic candidate.
What do you mean deprogramming?
Well, she just doesn't, she's never going to resonate with people outside of the bubble that she lives in the very, very far left.
Well,
and that, I mean, the New York Times, of all people, the people I've been like squabbling with for the last 7, 8, 10 years, whatever, when I was all about, Democrats have gone too far left, they just put out a huge editorial basically saying exactly what I've been saying.
what, that she's too far left?
Yeah.
AOC may not have officially announced a run for anything bigger, but the conversation around her already has a life of its own. For some, she represents the future of the Democratic Party. Bold, unapologetic, energizing. For others, she's a liability the party keeps refusing to honestly look at. And that's where things get serious. The moment a political figure stops being just a personality and starts becoming a symbol of the party's entire direction. Every question about messaging, image, and electability carries real weight. Maher's warning cuts straight to the heart of that tension. It's not just about who fires up the base at a rally. It's about whether that same energy can hold up under the pressure of a national election, where the audience isn't just the people already in your corner. And once that question enters the room, the whole conversation shifts. Because winning primaries and winning the country are two very different games. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and let's get into it.
I'd love to have AOC on the show, and Mandami and Elizabeth Warren, but I can't subpoena the guests. And I can't fix that what the Democrats are scared of more than anything else, I mean, obviously besides gluten, is being primaried from the far left, even though most Democrats are not far left. They're mild-mannered and moderate, at least at my bath.
Maher has been clear. He wants AO on his show, and she keeps not showing up. At this point, critics aren't calling it a scheduling conflict anymore. They're calling it a calculated decision. And honestly, look at the pattern. AOC tends to shine brightest in friendly rooms, predictable questions, controlled environments, audiences that are already on her side. Take that structure away, put her across from someone who actually pushes back, and things get complicated fast. That's not an accident. In politics, one bad, unscripted moment can travel further and hit harder than 10 perfect interviews. It can define you in ways you never recover from. So the stakes of sitting across from someone like Maher are real. And that's exactly why this keeps coming up. It's not about one missed invitation anymore. It's about a pattern, a consistent pattern of avoidance that people are starting to notice, starting to talk about, and starting to ask some very uncomfortable questions about. Because in politics, what you dodge says just as much as what you say.
There is one practical thing that Democrats can do right now that would help them regain power. It's never speak to Trump in person. No, I'm kidding. That's stupid. No, it's this. Inspire your moderates to vote in the primaries. Get that base excited. You have the numbers. After Congressman Moulton made his comment about his daughter not getting run over, he added, "But as a Democrat, I'm supposed to be afraid to say that." Well, then change what you're supposed to.
And critics say the real problem runs a lot deeper than any single controversy or any one personality. It starts with a feeling that's been growing, quietly at first, now louder, among moderates who feel like the Democratic Party no longer has the political range it once did. Voices like AOC and Zohran Mamdani aren't just rising figures on the left. To a lot of people watching, they're signals of a party moving into a lane that feels sharper, narrower, and increasingly unrecognizable, even to parts of its own coalition. Longtime Democrats, moderate voters, people who've supported this party for decades, are starting to look around and wonder if there's still a place for them in it. And that's exactly why AOC stays at the center of this conversation. She's no longer just a high-profile progressive voice with a large following. For critics, she's become a symbol, a direct symbol of where the party is heading and what it's willing to prioritize. And for a growing number of centrists and independents, that direction isn't just uncomfortable anymore. It's getting harder and harder to follow, and harder to vote for.
Had some deprogramming, she could be such a fantastic candidate.
What do you mean deprogramming?
Well, she just doesn't, she's never going to resonate with people outside of the bubble that she lives in the very, very far left.
Well,
and that, I mean, the New York Times, of all people, the people I've been like squabbling with for the last 7, 8, 10 years, whatever, when I was all about, Democrats have gone too far left, they just put out a huge editorial basically saying exactly what I've been saying.
what, that she's too far left?
Yeah.
And that leads straight to the question nobody on the left wants to sit with. How far can AOC's appeal actually reach? Inside progressive circles. Massive. No debate there. Her energy is real, her visibility is undeniable, and her ability to fire up the base is something most politicians would kill for. But here's the thing. National campaigns are a completely different test. They don't just reward passion. They demand crossover. They demand the ability to walk into a room that isn't already cheering for you and earn something real. Can AOC do that? Can she win trust from voters who didn't start in her corner, who don't share her worldview, who live in districts that look nothing like her base? That's where the skepticism kicks in hard. Broad national elections aren't won by maxing out one lane. They're won by expanding into lanes that don't naturally belong to you. Supporters will argue that coalitions take time to build, that the movement is still growing, and that's a fair point. But critics fire right back. If a candidate can't move beyond an already loyal base after this much time and this much visibility, the ceiling becomes impossible to ignore. And in national politics, ceilings aren't just inconvenient, they're everything.
Elected Obama, and clearly the country freaked out. We're still living in that freak out. We are not as progressed and evolved and intelligent as we think we are because we keep freaking out about this stuff.
Well,
you know,
the left freak out too. The left freaked out about a lot of bullshit too.
What did they freak out about?
Gender, race, parenthood, schools, homelessness, crime, the border, education. Like we stopped being a scientific people. Like it's not scientific.
But the left certainly stayed.
And the issues fueling this tension aren't random. They're not scattered or accidental. They're the same tight cluster of topics that keep dominating every political conversation, every dinner table argument, every campaign ad. Gender policy, schools, the border, crime, homelessness, public order. These aren't background noise. These are the issues everyday voters use to decide whether a party still sounds like it lives in the real world, or whether it's operating in a completely different reality from the one most people are actually dealing with. Progressive supporters argue these topics get oversimplified, stripped of context, and pushed through a hostile media lens designed to make them look extreme. And sometimes, that's a fair point. But critics fire straight back that the real problem isn't the coverage. It's the tone. It's the framing. It's the fact that some of these positions land with ordinary voters as abstract, ideological, and completely disconnected from the practical concerns of everyday life. And that perception didn't appear overnight. It didn't come from one bad headline or one bad debate moment. It built slowly, through repetition, through culture fights that never seem to reach a resolution, through a growing feeling that the conversation keeps drifting further from where most people actually are. That's why this concern keeps coming back into the spotlight, because underneath all the noise, it never fully went away.
No, they didn't.
Why not?
Because they think gender bullshit that they went way too far with, that's not scientific.
But how do I'm not trying to. How do they go too far with like gender stuff? And I'm not trying to
instead of, well, if I was teaching children, what I would teach them is there is a default setting for the human being, which is heterosexuality, but that doesn't mean every person is that, and we should completely respect everyone who isn't that. But we understand that that's called a minority, and what makes us a great country is that we respect minorities. We don't think they're lesser just because they're lesser in numbers.
Let's be straight about something. Treating people with dignity, protecting equal rights, refusing to reduce anyone to a stereotype, none of that is controversial. That's not a political position. That's just the baseline of a decent society. And most people across the spectrum actually agree on that. But critics argue that baseline has quietly been bundled with a second unspoken demand. Automatic agreement. No questions. No pushback. No debate. Just fall in line or face the consequences. And that's exactly where the friction explodes into something much bigger. Because supporting fairness and surrendering your own judgment are two completely different things. Respecting people doesn't mean shutting down open conversation. It doesn't mean every question is an attack. Supporters will push back and say some of these called honest questions are just hostility dressed up in polite language. And sometimes, sure, that's fair. But critics fire right back that when too many questions get dismissed before they're even allowed into the room, something breaks down. Trust erodes, resentment builds, and it builds fast. That's why this whole conversation has become so combustible. It's no longer just a debate over values or policy. It's a deeper debate over whether people still feel free to think out loud, to ask a genuine question without being instantly labeled, dismissed, and shut down.
It's not even put it on the birth certificate. That's what they wanted.
Were we teaching that?
Yes, we
When
were.
Were we teaching that?
Teaching it. It was a law here in California. See,
to teach what?
Don't put sex on the birth certificate. We'll see. Now, we've passed that period now.
I'm sorry, I don't remember that. I mean,
I know, because it doesn't get in the blue sky bubble.
Wait a minute, I'm not just blue sky.
I really think that's a lot of it, is that some of this stuff doesn't get in to everybody's.
And here's what really stands out. When people inside left leaning circles, people who should know this terrain better than anyone, start looking genuinely surprised by how far some of these arguments have gone. That reaction says everything. These issues have been front and center in policy fights, culture war debates, and political conversations for years now. So the surprise itself is revealing. It tells you something important about the disconnect between what's being pushed at the top and what's actually landing on the ground. And it gets even more telling when the response to hardline positions starts sounding confused, uncomfortable, even quietly resistant. Because this isn't just conservatives or outsiders pushing back anymore. Increasingly, it's people from within the same ideological space, same values, same general worldview, who are starting to question the direction, question the tone, and seriously wonder whether any of this is actually practical in the real world. That's a different kind of pushback. That's harder to dismiss, because you can't just label it as the opposition talking. When the doubts start coming from inside the house, from people who are supposed to be on the same team, that's not a minor signal you can brush off. That's a serious one, and smart political movements pay attention to it.
Because I remember the African-American community was always saying there's brutality from the cops. Everyone said, oh, that's ridiculous. Stop it. This is all myth. And then cops started wearing body cameras, and lo and behold, there's all this footage of violence towards black people.
There was also a lot of footage of violence that they did on white people, but that didn't make it into videos. You see, nobody cared about that. Not that it excuses the other.
I'm just saying, whenever a minority expresses fear and trepidation and like, hey, please help us, this is going on, I tend now to believe them. I tend now to believe the minority.
I always believe them.
Whenever they say, hey, this is going on and this is really terrible.
And that's exactly the point critics keep coming back to. Some of the claims being pushed in these debates go further than the evidence actually supports, and people are starting to notice. The clearest example, biological males competing in women's sports based solely on gender identity. Opponents aren't framing this as hatred, they're raising real, legitimate fairness concerns, especially in competitions where physical differences directly and measurably affect outcomes. Strength, speed, bone density. These aren't minor variables, they matter. And critics also push back hard on the idea that any restriction, any question, any hesitation automatically equals harm or bigotry. They say the entire conversation gets collapsed into absolute terms with almost zero room for nuance or honest discussion. The goal, they argue, isn't exclusion, it's balance. Finding a way to respect identity while also protecting fair competition for the women who've trained their entire lives for it. And one solution keeps coming up in these conversations: separate categories for transgender athletes, full participation, full inclusion, without dismantling the divisions that currently exist. Supporters call it a practical middle ground that takes everyone seriously without forcing an impossible choice. And honestly, that sounds a lot more reasonable and a lot more honest than just pretending the tension doesn't exist in the first place.
The left went too far with gender, maybe that was a function of, okay, these people are scared, they're being targeted, and we're watching them be targeted right now. We're watching transgender people be targeted in a very aggressive way. So
we are? Where?
Oh my God.
Where are they being targeted? I mean, like everybody is being targeted to a degree. I feel like,
but not scapegoated the way that transgender people are.
Scapegoated for what? Who's scapegoating
every school, every shooting is a transgender person.
Not every the ones that are.
Step back and look at the full picture, and the argument comes into sharp focus. This isn't about pretending cultural tensions don't exist. It's not about telling voters their concerns aren't real. It's about scale, credibility, and political judgment. Because critics argue that when every conflict gets framed at maximum intensity, when every disagreement becomes proof of deep-seated hostility, and when every concern gets fed into an ongoing crisis narrative, the message stops landing. Worse than that, it starts actively pushing away the exact voters the party needs to win over. The people in the middle, the persuadable ones, the ones who haven't made up their minds yet. Supporters will say the urgency is completely justified, that the stakes are too high to dial it back, that this moment demands that kind of energy. And look, that's a real argument, but critics fire straight back that urgency without discipline doesn't build a coalition. It shrinks one. It drives people to the edges instead of pulling them toward the center. And that's the deeper tension sitting underneath all of this, not just what the party believes, but whether the way it's communicating those beliefs is actually making the divide easier to bridge or harder to close. That's why this debate keeps mattering, not just for one politician, not just for one headline, not just for one election cycle, but for the long-term direction of where this party is actually headed.
The Republicans are probably going to give it back, is to be more moderate. But we don't have to argue about her. I mean, she has.
If people think she's too far left, then that shows another way this country's broken right now.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily broken in that way, but it just shows how the country is not there. That is not where the country is, and if you don't,
unfortunately, that's the one thing, and I hate to admit this. This country is not as mature as it thinks it is.
And here's another flashpoint that keeps coming up, and it's a big one. Some voices on the left suggest that when large numbers of people reject progressive arguments tied to AOC, it reveals something deeply wrong with the country. A moral failure. A society that just doesn't get it. Critics push back on that hard, because disagreement doesn't automatically mean moral collapse or social dysfunction. Sometimes it means something a lot simpler. People aren't convinced. Full stop, and Maher hits that nerve directly. In his view, rejecting AO's positions isn't proof that the country is broken, it's proof that persuasion still matters. That skepticism is alive and well. That emotionally urgent messaging, no matter how loud, no matter how passionate, doesn't automatically translate into votes when you step outside the friendly rooms. And here's where it cuts the deepest. When a movement starts reading all opposition as evidence of bad character, as proof that anyone who disagrees is hateful, ignorant, or morally bankrupt, it stops asking the harder, more important question. Is the messaging actually working? Is it persuading anyone new? Is it expanding the coalition or just reinforcing it? Because in the end, that may be the real issue sitting underneath all of this. Not just what AOC or the party believes, but whether the way they're selling it is actually winning anyone over. Hit like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next one.